Hello and welcome to our first interview of the evening. We're having 3 tonight, so that'll be really fun. Our first one is with Carol Booth. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good. Now, you've been connected with family daycare for years. Tell us a bit about your background and about what you're doing now.
I started family daycare actually because some of my friends were doing family daycare and the other work that I had been doing had ended. My own children had finished school and were starting university, and it was at one point all 3 of us were sort of studying at the same time, which was fun. And I found the more I did, the more I just really thought it was super valuable. And so starting really to spend more time with friends who were working became something that was less of an issue. It was more about the work, and I just finished my Cert 3, finished my diploma, did my advanced diploma in community sector management. I've done the Early Childhood Australia Leadership course. I just liked finding out more and more about how to do this better.
And you've stopped being an actual educator now, haven't you?
I have, yeah. So 2013, I was offered the chance to do part-time coordinator and part-time educator when I moved to Melbourne. And I really loved the balance of the two because I got to see the policies and all that stuff that you sit behind the desk brainstorming actually occurring when I'd go on visits to the children, but also on my days as an educator, I was living those sorts of things as well. So I found it made it seem a lot more real. And I found that my decision making back in those days, and also now, but having that educator experience gave me sort of more empathy when creating policies, making them a bit more realistic and achievable for educators.
And you're a full-time coordinator at the moment, yeah?
No, I work part-time as a mentor and also as the policy and advocacy leader for Inspired EC.
Right, okay. So tell me, in all of that background, have you ever had to deal with children with medical emergencies?
Medical emergencies, yes. You sort of average
medical conditions, let's say.
I find a lot of children who come to family daycare do have medical conditions. I think the parents are seeking a service that they talk to the same person at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. So family daycare seems to attract them, and also the smaller ratio that we have in family daycare. I think as the children get older, sort of from 2 and 3, it's easier for the family to sort of manage the child's medical condition in collaboration with the educator if the child is part of a smaller group. And yeah, yes, I have had, quite a few children that have had asthma and all those sorts of things, you know.
So give me some names of conditions of children.
Well, asthma seems to be a big one, especially down in Melbourne. Celiac disease, dairy intolerance. I haven't had anyone with diabetes, but as a coordinator, I've had an educator who had a child with diabetes who needed injectables. That required extra first aid because the first aid that educators must have isn't comprehensive enough for diabetes. So there was a lot of we seem to just have a variety of things, and the children who have a medical condition, if it's managed well between the educator and the family, we tend to not have too many flare-ups.
And if, have you or have any of your educators ever had to deal with a medical emergency?
I've had a couple with a child spiking a very high temperature, a child who couldn't have paracetamol or ibuprofen. So that was really getting into a shallow sort of body temperature bath and just trying to cool the child down while balancing a phone, trying to call the parent at the same time. Fortunately, there was someone home and they only lived a couple of streets away. Other times, a child who had an asthma plan, we'd followed the asthma plan, they'd had their medication, they weren't improving, so phoned the parent and they went to the doctor. Things like that. I haven't had any ring 000 episodes, which I'm very grateful for.
And do you think that's unusual, or do you think most educators would never have to get to a stage where they call 000?
I think the second one, and I think that's because we get to know our children so well in family daycare, and you get to you can really pinpoint those little clues leading up to the child becoming, having an acute attack of their illness.
Okay. Now, do you, as a coordinator or mentor, do you work with an educator to draw up risk management plans?
We do. So I find Regulation 90 and 91 has heaps of good information, as does the Guide to the NQF, of what is expected when a family enrolls a child, and what the service has to do in conjunction with the educator, working with the family to draw up those risk minimisation plans and communication plans, and getting that medical condition management plan from the family at enrolment time as well.
And when you're doing a risk management plan, do you kind of go, okay, imagine the craziest possible thing that could happen? Like, how do you envisage things that haven't actually happened?
You have a conversation with the educator, and it also comes back to knowing the type of activities that they do in their educational plan and their environment. And so you know that, say, if this child has asthma and they're allergic to, say, grass pollen, and this educator likes to go on bushwalks, well, you'd sort of have that as part of your risk minimisation plan. What would you do for that child so they can still be included in the activity? So it might be a case of you always take the medication when you go on an excursion, but you might wash their face and change their clothes when they come home so that they're not having the pollen that they've collected on that bushwalk later sort of breathed in and causing an issue. Things like that we sort of run through. Cooking activities. If you've got a child who's got an egg intolerance, you would talk about the menu that the educator provides or the type of food that the families send as well. And you'd display a sign in the area where the children are for all of the families to see that there is a child in the service who has, anaphylaxis to egg or whatever it is. And, you'd ask the other families to resist sending those sorts of foods to childcare. They would have them at home instead.
And do obviously, are there some educators that you deal with that you think, look, if there was an emergency, this person would be really calm and really, chill about it, or others that you go, oh, I'd hate, I'm not quite so sure if they'd manage an emergency as well as someone else?
I think I'd like to think that all of ours would be fine. I think definitely in the past I've had educators when I was at another service who I think it would have really, really bothered them. Also educators that were very good at phoning the office, phoning a colleague, so they would seek support fairly quickly as well. But I'd like to think that all of the educators that we take on are capable, and that comes down to screening your educators through your interview process. Because you do anticipate.
I wonder though I wonder sometimes how I'd go in an emergency. Like when I think about how I've done it in my life, sometimes I'm really good, and other times I'm just like, I could do things a lot better than what I have.
I think when it's not your own children, you've got that tiny little bit of sort of sideways removal of emotions and your training kicks in. Yeah, it is a little bit different than looking after your own kids when something happens, because you've got that sort of parent thing happening and you're starting to panic and anticipate everything. But when it's family daycare children, I think it is easier to sort of stay calm, stay level-headed, and you talk to the children and, mum, dad, grandma, whoever their grown-up is that's coming to get them, they'll be here soon, we're going to be fine, I'm here, I'm looking after you.
Okay, so what advice would you give educators, who might be thinking of enrolling a child with a medical condition?
The parents are a fantastic source of information because they've been managing the child's medical condition, if it's already diagnosed, up to the point that the children start with you. And they're a really good source of information for all those little kind of nuanced indicators which are not in a medical list of symptoms. So say, for instance, a child who gets chronic earache and tonsillitis, one of the things I'd noticed with that child was they wouldn't want to pick toys up. They wouldn't want to kneel on the floor and lean over and play with train sets that day. They would stand up. They do a lot of standing up sort of play because obviously putting their head down was uncomfortable for them. So for a child, when you know that they've got that sort of medical issue and you notice that, you think, I might watch them really close and we'll see what happens. And half the time, if you mention it to the parents, I noticed this today, that night you'll get a phone call from the parent saying, yep, we've got an ear infection, we've spiked a temperature, thank you for telling me that. So yeah, it's about knowing your children really well, good sort of communication with the families, and jotting down a lot of little notes. Sometimes it's the little diary jottings that we do that piece together a much bigger picture to help a child get that diagnosis further down the track, because not all children come to us with that medical condition diagnosed. A lot of the time, the educators are part of that diagnosis process, and it's our observations and our notes that sort of contribute to all of that too.
I think that's one of the most important things that you mentioned, that we do know our children so well in family daycare that it really, it does really make it a lot easier to notice small signs. Well,
Yes.
Thank you very much for talking to us tonight. I really appreciate it. And I'm
That's
sure
my pleasure.
out of it. Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.